Morning glory, America. That's Johnny Horton. Gotta sink the Bismarck. If you're old enough, you remember that song. Well, the Ukrainians have sunk the Moskva. Well, at least it's abandoned. All 500 Russian sailors have to get off the Moskva. That's called the Moscow in English. The Moskva has been hit and had to be abandoned. Their biggest ship, their largest capital ship in the Black Sea, their command ship. What an embarrassment for Putin. And there being many more Neptunes to follow for the rest of the Black Sea fleet. Putin is just piling disaster on top of disaster. Maybe he'll fire everyone in his Navy now that he's fired his Colonel General of his Foreign Intelligence Service. Maybe it's the Admiral of the Russian Navy, as well as all the Russian generals and colonels who've been killed in the course of this botched attempt to invade a free and stable and peaceful Ukraine. Now, they are still a major power, a great power. They still have nuclear weapons. They have still far more population and force density than Ukraine. But if we would simply get off the dime and start doing stuff. Now, not all news is good news. It's terrible news. In fact, 1,000 Ukraine Marines had to surrender in Mariupol as the city has fallen to the Russians, and it scenes of devastations so intense and awful that I can't show you the B-roll of it. I do have the Biden administration finally deciding to announce the $800 million in weaponry. They put the helicopters back in. Yesterday morning I told you they were sending helicopters. And yesterday afternoon, they took them out. And last night, they put them back in because that's Team Biden. They're running the war like LBJ ran the Vietnam War out of the White House, which is a terrible way to run a war. Let the Pentagon run the military's replacement. Fantastic article this morning in the Wall Street Journal, The Secret of Ukraine's Military Success, Years of NATO Training. Now, who authorized that NATO training? Well, what do you know? It's Donald Trump. Donald Trump. In 2014, Russia chomped the Donbass and Barack Obama did nothing. From 2017 to 2020, NATO flooded Ukraine with training. We flooded Ukraine with lethal weapons, not K rations and blankets like Barack Obama did, the most feckless president of my lifetime. I know Biden's the worst, but the most feckless, the most indifferent. I mean, Biden's infirm. Obama didn't care. And the Metternich of MSNBC, Ben Rhodes, was advising him. And of course, the goofballs that are still there are just goofballs. They don't know how the world works, and they sit around in their seminar room and they talk like it's Davos, and people are dying in Mariupol, and they're sinking ships, and they're wondering, oh, do we put helicopters on the They're just incompetent, in over their head, paralyzed by fear. They're showing up every day, and they call meetings, and they talk to each other to try and find some consensus point of fear from which to operate. If there is a Patton among them, I doubt it. I know there's not a Marshall. I know there's not an Eisenhower, and I doubt that there's a Patton. The European Union ban on Russian energy that's being discussed would spark a recession in Germany, so Germany's losing its. They're leaving NATO again. In all but formal way. They were all gung ho 6 weeks ago. We're gonna double our defense budget, spend all this stuff. Really gonna, and now we have recession. We don't want a recession. Maybe we won't do this. Meanwhile, Great Britain continues to lead. They seized $7 billion in Abramovich, the oligarch's assets from the Isle of Jersey, the British Crown dependency of Jersey. I don't even know where Jersey is. It's one of the islands, I think. But Jersey is $7 billion richer today, having taken the oligarch Abramovich's hidden money. He's got to be happy. Joe Biden's approval rating in the latest poll, Josh Kraushaar put it out last night. I think it's Quinnipiac, 33%. I did not make a mistake. You might think, oh, Hugh's made a mistake. Hugh's making that up. I'll go find the exact number. All I could do is tweet yikes. Here it is, new Quinnipiac poll. Biden approval, 33%. Biden disapproval, 54%. 28% approval with independents. 18% approve strongly. 43% disapprove strongly. That's Quinnipiac. That's a Democratic poll. I mean, they lean Democrat. They don't know how to poll. Nobody knows anymore. It's not like they're not malicious. It's just impossible to do, but it always tilts Democrats because they can still find Democrats willing to talk on the phone, and even those Democrats are down on Joe Biden. He's infirm, and people know it, and they don't have any confidence in him, and they don't have any confidence in Kamala Harris, and they're going to get wiped out. They did get Frank James. He's been arrested. What we know about him is he was a racist responding to racism, and he's mentally deranged, and he shot 10 people, and he could have killed a lot more, and he's a nut, and the legacy media is being very careful about telling you what he said online. I've watched a couple of videos. It's mostly race-based hatred. And if you feed enough race-based hatred into the mainstream media, the nutters are going to be influenced by race-based hatred. And we hear so much about QAnon, which I still have never come across except in legacy media. And I come across race hatred everywhere. I think QAnon is like a tiny, minuscule percent of race-based hatred, both from the far right and the far left, and we ought to focus on that, not the nuttery of the QAnon people, but that's just me. CDC has come through again. Irrelevant guidance that angers everyone and destroys even further the remaining shreds of credibility it has by extending the mask mandate on airplanes and in airports for another 15 days, despite every data point, every single data point showing that the virus has gone down. They're worried, so they're going to go another 2 weeks. That is the desperate death rattle of a bureaucracy that knows it's losing power and it will never get power again. Retire Anthony Fauci, take everything back from the CDC, fire everyone on the top floor of that building, and start over. That is not what America wants from its public health agency. New York Times is a very long article that I recommend because it's sad. You know, we lost many millions of people around the world to COVID. 167,000 children in America, for example, have lost a parent or a primary caregiver in the pandemic. 167,000. Grandma and grandpa are stepping up. And this very long article is our grandma and grandpas in America who are stepping up to take care of their grandchildren who have been orphaned by COVID. Strongly recommend to any of you who have someone in that situation, you send it. They're not alone. They will be networked together. Baby formula shortage everywhere. Straining families. Stores are rationing how much you can buy. Don't go out and buy baby formula if you're pregnant or about to. But if you see one, put a couple in the fridge. I don't think it keeps forever. And stop hoarding. Don't hoard America. We'll get enough stuff eventually. There is a huge snarl at the Texas border as Greg Abbott steps up the inspection of Mexican trucks. And of course, nobody wants inspections because truckers want to get where they're going, legit truckers. But unfortunately, the amount of fentanyl flowing into the United States and the border being open everywhere has increased the cartel's desire to prey upon. We had a 100% increase over 10 years in opioid deaths among children aged 14 to 17. 100% increase as they buy fentanyl-laced opioids that are fake and synthetic and sold on the black market. They think they're buying a Xanax or a Vicodin or something like that, and they end up with fentanyl and they die. This is the downside to rigidly controlling opioid distribution to adults from whom kids used to steal a pill or two. Now they're just going online and ordering what they think is opioid, and it's not. It's fentanyl, and fentanyl is killer. Biden administration looks to speed student loan forgiveness for defrauded borrowers. Well, look, if you've been defrauded, you shouldn't have to pay. But what that really means is they're giving away the money again because they're so desperate. Honestly, if you're a Democrat, you're looking ahead at November, and it's just a giant black hole. I reminded people online yesterday, in 1993, the Conservatives in Canada had 165 seats in the Parliament when they went to elections. Many of you are not old enough to remember this. This was just when I was getting on the air. I got on the air in 1991, so I remember it. 1993, the Conservatives, Brian Mulroney had been prime minister for 5 years. He'd stepped down. The Conservatives had done a pretty good job, but they'd been around for a long time. Things had gone sideways under the new leader. 165 seats in the Parliament. After the smoke cleared on Election Day, they had left 2. 165 to 2. I think that's what I believe. That's exactly what Democrats are looking at right now. Political oblivion and devastation because everything they touch has turned to absolute dross. From inflation to supply chain woes to the war on American energy independence to being late to the gate on everything having to do with Putin to dealing with Tehran, the southern border being open. It's just quite simply a complete meltdown at every level, and it's all because of the Democrats, but especially education. The K through gender education, the ending of advanced placement classes in places like San Diego's Patrick Henry High School, the war on kids, the war on the middle class, the war on everything normal and good, the war on everything by everything from the hard left. America's going to vomit it out in December, and it can't come soon enough. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. West Bank last night as an extensive Israeli military operation continues in the aftermath of many terrorist attacks. 4 extremist Jews arrested for planning an animal sacrifice atop of the Temple Mount. It's just kind of nutty, and the government is shaky. Joining us to tell us what's going on, Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy minister of Israel. Good morning, Michael, and a happy Passover to you in advance. What is going on over there? I mean, we're focused on Ukraine, but I look at the Times of Israel every morning, and it's a nightmare.
Well, hey, you may seem like a nightmare from over there. Here, it's kind of business as usual. You know, there was a terrorist attack in Tel Aviv last week. The terrorists were shot right down the street from me. The shots woke us up at 5:30 in the morning, and our guys got them. The next day, the beaches were packed. You had to see this to believe this. I mean, talk about tens of thousands of people out dancing, and that's the strength. That's the state of Israel. That's our spirit. They're never going to get us. And
that's not what's going on in Brooklyn after the attack on the subway. People are afraid to go on the subways. I guess the Israelis are just inured to it.
It's not just inured. We're just, we've been doing this for about 3,000 years, and like I said, we've developed some resilience here.
Well, that's why Passover is Passover, right? I mean,
it's about resilience.
It's about resilience. So, what is going on with the government, Mike?
Now there's a hard one. There's a hard one. So we got 60-60. I explained to you last week how that worked. Yeah. That even 61-59 is not really sustainable over a long period. 60-60 is totally untenable. So now it's about a horse trading. It's going to be like Bennett is going to try to get key people in his coalition. He may try to get the ultra-Orthodox into his coalition. He has not wanted the ultra-Orthodox in his coalition. He's got some anti-ultra-Orthodox parties in his coalition. And the ultra-Orthodox would basically be able to name their price. On the Bibi side, on the Netanyahu side, he also is going to try to get the ultra-Orthodox. He basically has them, but the big prize there is Benny Gantz, the current defense minister, who has 9 seats. By the way, that's 3 more seats than the prime minister has. He doesn't like the prime minister. He doesn't like the foreign minister, Yair Lapid. And I think in exchange for a rotation agreement in which Benny Gantz will be prime minister first and Bibi after him, I think there's something to talk about there.
And what would the former prime minister do when he was not the prime minister, when Prime Minister Gantz was Prime Minister Gantz?
Well, I think part of it, and this is going to sound rather arcane, he'll try to pass in legislation in the Knesset what's known as the French law. Now, France has a law that if you are a sitting French president, you are immune from legal accusations. You cannot be indicted as a sitting French president or for anything you did as president. So we don't have that law. Bibi wants that law. He wants it retroactively to apply to himself so that he can get out from under these court cases. And I think that's the only quid pro quo he'd ask from Benny Gantz, and I would not be surprised if Benny gave it to him.
So my question is it possible that we have like a Passover miracle 2022? Meaning that we come out of Passover weekend with a new government that's strong, that's got 69 members in it or 68 members in it. It's going to be secure. It's going to have a rotation agreement. It's going to last 5 years, and we can get past that. Is that something that's even realistic?
Well, it's a miracle for whom? That's the question. If it's for the Israeli right and such a government comes to being, that's a miracle. If it's Israeli center and left, it's a disaster. Because it would be a very right-wing government. It would include some parties, some members who have been quoted saying racist things against Arabs. One of those members, Bezalel Smotrich, was just ostracized by the British Jewish community. He came for a visit in London. They said, get lost. So, it depends a nightmare for whom. But it is possible, and it's possible that Bibi could put together a government without going to elections. It really boils down to, in my view, to the future of Benny Gantz.
Well, it also boils down, in my view, is that the Iranians are getting close to swindling Joe Biden, who's infirm and not in control of this. And it makes no sense at all because the Russians are midwifing a deal, even as we're sinking their ships and providing munitions to go to war with them. No. And I think the real problem is over your border to the north and all the arms and the, 400 strikes that Israel's made on Iran. Does that drive Israeli politics at all, the imminence of the threat?
Unfortunately not. I never take issue with anything you say. I'll take issue with one word that you use, and that is swindle. I don't think the Iranians are swindling anybody in this administration. I think the administration is going into this with their eyes open. And that for us is the great tragedy. The effort to stop Iran from transforming Syria into a forward base, our efforts above the board and below the board to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons is going to continue irrespective of who's in office.
I think you're right. Let me put it this way. I don't think Joe Biden has a clue what he's doing. I don't think he has control over the team Blinken that's at the table in Vienna. I really don't. I think the man is too infirm to be president and does not know what he's doing. It's such an astonishingly bad deal as it's been outlined. Or am I exaggerating, Michael? I think it's a terrible deal.
I don't know about the competence of the president. I know it's an astonishingly bad deal. The Iranian deal of 2015 was predicated on three assumptions. One, that would make Iran into a responsible regional power. Two, that it would kick the can down the road at some point, right? And three, that it would block Iran's path to the bomb. Of those three, only one is still relevant. Everyone knows Iran's not going to be a regional power. Everyone knows it's not going to block the path to the bomb. There's only one reason to do disagreement, and that's to kick the can down the road. And guess who's at the end of the road? We are.
Yep. You are. Well, a happy Passover anyway. A blessed one to you, Dr. Oren, and everyone in Israel. May peace return to the promised land. And I will be right back with more Good Thursday, Holy Thursday greetings for you, America. Stay tuned live from inside the Beltway. I'm Hugh. And I am glad that you know I cover all of the United States Senate races that are on the ballot in 2022. And in primaries, I am resolutely neutral. And in Georgia, I've had Herschel Walker on. Time to have on Josh Clark, who is running against Herschel for the nomination to take on Pastor Warnock. Josh Clark, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. How are you?
I am fantastic, Hugh. Thank you so much for having me this morning.
Let's start by telling people how they find you and then tell us about you. Where are you online? Handles, websites, Twitter, all that sort of stuff.
Yes, you can find me at votejosh.com. Again, that's votejosh.com. You'll find all of my social media links there at the very top. Votejosh.com. Thank you.
And now tell us your bio. What's the backstory, Josh?
Sure. Well, you know what? I just a common, ordinary Georgia patriot. I was born and raised here in Georgia and grew up in I like to say an average family, but I don't know if 10 children is average, but I'm the oldest of 10 children. And my father was a pastor of a small church, and so we were the poor talked about, with 10 of us on a preacher's salary. And my mother was a teacher who I'm so grateful, God bless her and all the homeschool parents, she decided to homeschool us. And so I grew up, being blessed to learn the American family values that seem to be under attack everywhere we turn today. But faith in God, hard work, serving others. My mother, speaking of serving others, my mother, Hugh, lost her health due to losing 3 organs, a kidney, a spleen, and adrenal in an accident.
Oh, dear.
So the oldest, it was, fell on me to step up and help raise the younger siblings. And, I look back and I think, I'm grateful for it, except I wouldn't change anything except for Mom's health, her suffering. But, I learned that life wasn't about me. I loved history and learning about our founding fathers and previous generations that also rose to the occasion to overcome the challenges before them. And today the challenges are greater than ever. But I got out of high school and I immediately, shortly after, I got involved in the Republican Party as far as just volunteering, just trying to help get good constitutional conservatives elected. I believe that scriptures say when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, and when the wicked rule, the people mourn. And today we're doing a lot of mourning. But in my 20s, I was trying to turn this state red while I was building a couple of companies that are still around today and starting a family. I married my childhood sweetheart, known since I was 5, and we have 6 children. And at 30, I was challenged myself to run for office, which is something that wasn't part of my plans. I thought I'd be more likely a pastor or a missionary that supported myself through my businesses. But I did. I ran in a race that nobody thought we had any chance, and we ended up winning in a landslide victory thanks to a great team and hard work. And I call myself the proven conservative because I think it really tells the story and really distinguishes me from the candidates in that we're running for the highest office in the land, the U.S. Senate, yet nobody has any legislative experience. Some of them, in fact, were voting Democrat for years while I was working to turn the state red. And so, but I served, Hugh, and I walked away. How many times don't we wish we saw more politicians that would serve, do their duty, make a difference? And then
was this in a county office or the Georgia Assembly?
I served in the Georgia Assembly.
Oh, Josh Clark. Which part of Georgia were you representing?
I represented one of the fastest growing counties in the nation, Gwinnett County.
Okay. So keep going. So you did your time. You term limited yourself voluntarily, and you went back to business, I assume, and taking care of the family?
That's right. I went back into business for the past 8 years. I gained not only do I have companies that we own today, but I built my 20s, but I got some executive experience. I served as the executive vice president for an international company called Neolife. They sell health and wellness products. And then in 2020, just a lot of sleepless nights watching what was happening to our country. And, you know, when I had served those 2 terms in the Georgia House, I had really every day I'd walk underneath that gold dome and I'd try to honor those who had given their life for our country. I have 4 brothers who served on the front lines of Afghanistan, and I'll never forget one of my brothers. In fact, he's a representative. He's an Army Ranger, and now in the highest level of training, bad to the bone. I'll just leave it at that. He's finishing that up right now. But he said something to me that I'll never, ever forget for the rest of my life. He was 23, and I was 30 years old when I ran the first time and served. And he said to me, he said, "Josh, if we lose this country from within, then my comrade who lost his life the second week over there is in vain." And I thought that was really a lot of wisdom and the right perspective for every public servant to have. That's what this is about, ensuring the blessings of liberty for the next generation. And when I served, I earned the Defender of Liberty Award for my 100% conservative voting record. You know, as a small businessman, I was not only was I proud of some of the social issues that we fought, and that being fetal pain bill that we passed, but also as a businessman, I helped remove red tape and regulations for business owners and traveled the state with hearing sessions, listening to them, and I'm proud of what we got done and making Georgia together as a team. We made Georgia the most business-friendly state in the nation. That was actually my stated goal in my campaign, but you shouldn't stick to me. You serve and then you move on, and that's what I did. I moved on, went back to private life, but I'm stepping up now because we're under attack. And those blessings of liberty, I believe we're at a tipping point where if we don't get the right people on this red wave, it doesn't matter to me. It's not about me. It's not about them. It's not about celebrity status. It's about who has a proven record that will step up and fight and stand alone if necessary.
Now, Josh Clark, let me jump in here. People listen to my show every day. It's got 470 affiliates. I have on candidates from Washington State yesterday and Ohio, from Pennsylvania. You're from Georgia. I talk to people because it's my belief that Americans are interested in every race. They care deeply about getting the Senate back. We have to beat Raphael Warnock. Why are you a better candidate to beat Raphael Warnock than anyone else running? Of course, the big name is Herschel Walker. We don't deny. Why are you better than Herschel and everybody else to take on Pastor Warnock and beat him?
Yeah. Well, number one, none of them let me back up. We're running for the U.S. Senate, of course, and that's not 2 years like Congress. It's not 4 years like the president. It's 6 years. It's so long, it's almost scary. You can either do a lot of good or a lot of bad. You know, and we learned in the past, we had a nice man, a military hero, appreciate his service, John McCain, right? He served our nation, and then he went to the U.S. Senate. We found out just because you serve in the military, like 13 immediate family members of ours, 4 of my brothers. I mean, again, I hold them in the highest regard. But I've learned the hard way, and we have as a nation, that just because you're military doesn't necessarily mean you're conservative. And so thanks to John McCain, we still have Obamacare. You know, and I have been in the trenches, rolled up my sleeves to try to help get what I thought were good people elected that gave great stump speeches, only to be severely disappointed. So we have all these people, nice people. Some of them were voting Democrat for years. Others, like Herschel Walker, I really appreciate how he stood for Donald Trump. I appreciate him getting involved in doing that. But, he himself said over a year ago that I have the video, that we need to change the Constitution because of changing demographics. And I believe that we've got why did we change the Constitution? Because of changing demographics. That's scary. And so I think he's a great man, a nice person, but I think between that and the fact that he cannot win in November, I mean, if you read his book, I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get into all the gory details, but if you read the book, I believe in redemption and forgiveness, but the reality is the Democrats will not forgive They will not forget, and they're going to nail them on that, and we have to win in November. This is, as you know, pundits across the country are saying this is the most likely U.S. Senate seat to flip if we get the right person. So I'm the proven conservative. I'm the guy who can go head-to-head with Raphael Warnock. I mean, I can't wait. His only qualification is he's a reverend. Well, if he wants to talk about the scriptures, I've got books of the
I don't think I'm going to play Bible
memorized.
Jeopardy with you, Josh Clark. I get the sense I'm not going to play Bible Jeopardy with a PK. But let me close this way. You came to my attention because I've got a great GM of an affiliate down on San Simeon Island. Said, you got to talk to Josh Clark. So you broke through because you got to me. How do you break through national? Is this the first national show you've done? Do people know you're out there and running?
Yeah, you know what? I'm really thankful. We're making the momentum is on our side. We live in a 45-foot Liberty bus right now, 45-foot Liberty bus that my wife drives as I'm in the back making phone calls. But we're crisscrossing the state as a family. We made this decision as a family because this affects all of us, and we really need families to step up. Family values are majorly under attack. And so as we're doing this, we are actually getting, by God's grace, I'm thankful, an amazing team of volunteers all across the state. The momentum is on our side. In fact, I even had Trump's deputy reach out to me recently, and he said, Josh, whatever you're doing the right thing. We were asked to look into your race. And he said the other guys aren't moving, and Herschel's fallen 20 points and is falling. And 39% of his voters say they would vote for they would consider voting for someone else. It's wide, name ID is wide, but it's very shallow. And so, as the only person that's a proven conservative in this race with the experience to go fight and stand up for our values and the Constitution from day one, that's me. And Hugh, one more distinction. Speaking of standing alone, I've been tested in the legislature. I'll never forget when the Obamacare, the Non-Affordable Care Act, they were trying to roll it out in our state. And I didn't just say, I won't vote for that. I went office by office, door by door, convincing people we can't do this. And I remember when the speaker, when the leadership called me up and said to me, son, who do you think you are, the tail wagging the dog? You need me to get reelected. And I said, sir, in all due respect, and this is where I was tested, and this is where I've learned the difference between just being a nice person and somebody who has a spine and will stand and for the next generation. And I told him, I said, when I get home at night and I kiss my kids in the forehead, I need to know that my service was for the next generation. When I lay my head on the pillow, I need a clear conscience between me and God. And then after that, as much as I can, I'll work with people to get things done if it's for the next generation, and if it's within the clearly defined lane of the Constitution and the powers granted to the federal government. And
on that note, Josh,
and I think we can win.
VoteJosh.com. I don't know how you got that handle because that's a great one. It's easy to remember. VoteJosh.com. Josh Clark, candidate for United States Senate in Georgia. Welcome back, America. The Moskva missile cruiser is the command ship of the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. It's been abandoned after taking a hit from a Neptune missile. Jim Talent is the former senator from Missouri, defense expert at the Bipartisan Policy Center. How significant is it that a Neptune can hit the Moskva?
Well, what it shows us is the capabilities of anti-ship cruise missiles, which the Chinese, of course, know very well. They have the biggest arsenal by far of them anywhere, which is the reason we're so concerned about getting our aircraft carriers too close to Taiwan in the event of a conflict there. So, yeah, I mean, they're extremely effective. That's going to reduce the integrated air defenses the Russians have in southern Ukraine. I mean, we're into the third phase of the war now. I mean, the Russians lost the first two. They wanted to decapitate the government. That didn't happen. They wanted to take Kyiv through a more typical combined arms operation. That went nowhere. And now the issue is, can they solidify and hold on to their position in the Donbass, or can the Ukrainians push them out? And we're going to see in the coming weeks and months.
Not surprisingly, Senator Talent, you went to the final chapter in the book. The chapter is what lessons for the future. We don't want to fight the last war in Ukraine when we have a Taiwan problem. We want to be prepared. And the fact that Ukraine, which I don't think anyone would rate in the top 20 military powers in the world, is able to sink the command ship of a great nuclear power with one shot should tell us that our U.S. Navy has to rapidly evolve to deal with new circumstances. I know they are doing so. Do you think they're far enough along in doing so?
Well, I'll tell you what's not going to do it is a defense budget that retires 24 ships while it's buying 9. A defense budget that cuts the F-35 buy. Now, that's a different service, but it's the only active fifth-generation fighter line we have, and we weren't buying enough as it was. So, look, I would say that if there was one thing that I could have in Indo-PACOM that we don't have, it's as many anti-ship long-range or intermediate-range cruise missiles as we can get and we can base there. Because if we can threaten Chinese targets the way they now threaten our targets, now you have a substantial deterrent. Maybe I spoke too quickly. If we could double the number of attack subs we have in theater, that would also be really good.
Now, can the anti-ship missiles threaten the underwater fleet?
No. I mean, that's one of the good things about one of the reasons the undersea domain is still an advantage for us is because our attack submarines are the best in the world, and they're a deadly platform. You don't even know where they are a lot of the times. Now, the Chinese are getting better at anti-submarine warfare, but we still have a decided advantage.
And so my question comes, I talk to sailors a lot, and they're in the family, and of course Stab is on a lot, and I talk to Jerry and Mark and all of our friends. And they tell me that there are ways to defend our ships from these missiles like the Neptunes, and they're concentrated energy weapons, rail guns, things like that. Are you confident they'll work, or will a barrage of these flying out from Shanghai just sink whatever we've got?
And that's the problem. If you're a carrier strike force and you've got ballistic missiles coming at you, you've got cruise missiles coming at you, and as you say, in a barrage, you've got a number of them coming at you at the same time, even if they're not hypersonic, which is the next thing we have to worry about. You know, the issue is, can you get them all? Am I confident? I'm confident we're working on it. But no, I'm not confident. That's the problem. I mean, the Chinese very deliberately built a missile-centric military in order to deny us access to crucial parts of the world, in particular the South China Sea. And
so I'm going to talk to Mike Rogers right after this about this. I'm going to talk about the defense budget and the fact that the defense budget seems to me to be antiquated and still a pie divided in 4 sections, and those sections don't change in response. Do you think the defense budget needs a fundamental reconfiguring in the aftermath of what we've learned in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, Jerry Hendricks and others are convincing me that, yes, we do need to move more to a Navy-centric kind of approach. But at the levels we're talking about now, I mean, as you know, what the budget the administration submitted is a real cut in the defense budget, in the sense it doesn't keep up with inflation. They're losing several $1 billion a month to inflation. So we need what Jim Mattis said we needed, what the Strategy Commission said we needed, a 3 to 5% increase every year throughout the life of a fit-up, a 5-year defense plan.
A real increase above inflation.
Yes, because inflation is so high, we're talking double-digit increases in the defense budget. I don't like it, but, inflation is where it is. And, we can't even keep up with personnel costs at this rate. So they're going to have to do it. I think the Congress is going to increase. I don't think there's any question in my mind that the Congress is going to increase the defense budget, but they have to be decisive and it has to be sustained.
So if inflation's at 8.5% and you want a 3% real growth, you've got to have a defense budget go up by 11.5% to 12%.
Yes, the numbers should be in the mid 800s next year.
Jim Talent, I love clarity, I love succinctness, and that's why I wish you a happy Easter. Keep coming back. From the Bipartisan Policy Center, former Senator Talent, one of our leading defense spokespeople in the United States, coming back with the ranking Republican on the Defense Committee. The former Congressman Mike Rogers, chairman of the Study of the Presidency in Congress, former FBI agent, member of House Intel, about that. Good morning, Congressman Rogers. Welcome back. Good to have you.
Hugh, it's always good to be back. Good to hear your voice.
Tell me a little bit, as a former bureau guy, what you thought about people immediately saying this is not terrorism yesterday. I can never understand why we rule out terrorism before we even know who the guy is.
Well, candidly, as an FBI guy, you should start there, and I'll tell you why. So 2 things. It was obviously pre-planned. They were reporting that there were unexploded devices right? So that means that there was, in that scenario, you have to start thinking, okay, there's probably more than one person. How did they get the devices on? And then there was an active shooting incident. So my first reaction would be, yes, it's probably terrorism. Let's figure out why it might not be. And remember, the train station has been a long Al-Qaeda target. So I don't know if you remember the Zazi case when the guy in Colorado, I think it was 2009, was packing up. He had bombs in his backpack. He was, he was driving, and he was driving from Colorado to attack the New York subway system. And so, the first time I heard it, Hugh, it had all the hallmarks of terrorism. And by the way, is this a crime or is this domestic terrorism? I'm still not convinced that it isn't domestic terrorism. So it might have been a terrorist act after all.
I've only seen one of his YouTube videos, and he's clearly a disturbed individual motivated by racial animus. I think that makes him an extremist of some category or another, but I also don't think it's a replicable. It's not Antifa. There's no organization behind him. He's not associated with some radical splinter from BLM. He's just a disturbed individual who has race on the mind constantly. As you study this, does the political environment contribute to this, or are individuals this disturbed simply going to be a part of the furniture in our unfortunate landscape going forward?
Well, I certainly think the animus of the debate in America contributes to people who are always right on the edge. I think, unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of folks that would fit his profile who could be violent, have had some violent interaction in their past, who could absolutely flip this switch and decide that this is the way to go. And remember, everybody's feeding us. Social media is feeding this. He's feeding himself. He's on, he had YouTube postings. People are reacting to that. And so all of that just feeds into this fragile psyche of someone like this who clearly has some mental health issues to actually take this next step. And so I think it's a combination of all of it. We in America don't seem to like each other very much right now, and we're very fond of telling each other that we don't. And I think that all feeds into the psychology of someone who's right on the edge.
Now, I think there are two bell curves in America, a Democratic bell curve and a Republican bell curve, and they meet in the middle at the tail of the left side of the Republican Party and the right side of the Democratic Party. But mostly it's the tails at either end that I'm worried about, the far right and the far left. And I think they get way too much attention, Mike Rogers, way too much attention. What do you think at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and of Congress? Do we pay too much attention to extremes and not enough attention to the normal people who are going about their normal lives? They're not very interesting from a ratings perspective, but they actually represent the vast, vast majority of Americans.
Absolutely and completely true. Even our political process starts driving people to the right or the left. How many times have you heard people say, well, I'm not exactly a fan of X or Y, but they're better than the other guy? And so we don't have a good representation of the vast majority of Americans who still believe that this is a pretty amazing place. I mean, you can be your own person in your own way and do your own good, really only in a place like America. And most people get up every day believing that. The problem is that social media, that loud, very right, very left conversation makes you think that, boy, this is just a terrible place with nothing going on for it. And I have to tell you, couldn't be further from the truth. America is still as strong today as it has ever been. Yes, we have challenges. Yes, we have difficulties. But I'll tell you, when you start thinking about the promise of America versus all the other trouble in the world, no place you'd rather be than here. And it's about time we start telling people and reminding people, hey, this is a pretty amazing place. Spend some time trying to fix the problems. That's great. But don't spend all your time trying to tell people why America is a terrible place.
So what is the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress? What is the agenda? What are you doing?
So, well, my portfolio happens to be the national security portfolio at the CSPC. And so one of the things that we're doing, everything from space initiative, meaning how do we get commercial space more integrated in the national security space to solve big problems and hopefully cheaper for the American taxpayer. We spent a lot of time on the Russia problem, understanding their threats, understanding how the new relationship they have with China is going to threaten us both economically and militarily. And so we have different projects. We are smaller than most, and we actually drive for results, meaning We're going to spend our time doing things where we can actually make a difference either through legislation or policymakers, and we've shown that we can do that.
Do you miss Congress?
You know, I miss the work. As chairman, I have to tell you, as an FBI guy that served in the Army, when they asked me to be chairman of the Intelligence Committee, which oversees all 17 of our intelligence agencies, a budget of about 70-some billion dollars at the time was the unclassified number, and everything from space to human collection to, you know, how we were doing covert operations around the world. What a huge highlight. The problem with Congress is that we ended up spending more and more time not being members of Congress and being, political torchlights, if you will. And people got rewarded for that. It became, how many likes do you get? How much social media activity gets you attention? And that part I don't miss at all. And candidly, I don't think it's good for the country that we continue to focus on those things. We have huge problems to fix in the country, from border security to actually literacy in this country. We're still graduating people from high school that can't read past the 6th grade level, and we're wondering why we can't compete in the world. All of those challenges are going to be hugely important for the future prosperity and security of the United States. If we focused on that instead of all the other, it'd be great, and Congress would be great. But boy,
let me finish by asking you, Congressman, it's a year since Afghanistan fell apart. The president announced the withdrawal. Yeah. It's been a year. We now have another intelligence series of surprises in Ukraine. We thought we could deter. We did not deter. Integrated deterrence failed. Is the intelligence community fixable? I mean, do we ever not get surprised?
Well, remember, intelligence is a 1,000-piece puzzle, and their job is to collect as many pieces as they can and then give you an analytical look, if you will, about what that picture looks like. And so sometimes they're spot on, and sometimes they just don't get it right, and it's never going to be perfect. I do think the way they've changed politically, the way we collect and assemble and analyze information, it needs to be re-looked at. There needs to be a very hard conversation amongst ourselves as Americans and with our intelligence committee about what their form and function is, to make sure we don't miss it. And by the way, the Russians got it wrong too.
Did they ever?
Oh boy, did they. And so I think, listen, you can't always rely on intelligence alone, but had we reacted when we knew that they were coming over, they got that part right, in a way that was, I think, a little bit more aggressive, meaning the quantity and quality, important quality of the weapons going into Ukraine would have been really important. And by the way, we had it right in Afghanistan. The intelligence community had it right in Afghanistan. The president and the policymakers just didn't listen. I mean, everybody, defense was saying, don't do this. The intelligence was saying, hey, this is going to be a disaster. And guess what? It was. And I think that's going to be a stain on our national character for some time.
And many, many results have coiled out from that. Mike Rogers, good to talk to you again. Chairman of the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, former senior member, chairman of the House Intel Committee. Always good to talk to Mike Rogers. Thank you.
A little different today. This is a poem I wrote for a young man named Will. I think it does have an Easter theme. At 13, Will was knocked off his bicycle by a pickup truck, fractured skull. The first hospital he was brought to, it said it was helpless, told his parents there was no hope, and they prevailed in getting him moved to another hospital, special surgery, brain surgery, a coma for several weeks, many prayers, including a woman, a mysterious woman who somehow made it into intensive care and put a holy card in his hands. He not only survived, he prevailed. He graduated, wrote a cookbook, day trades, calls himself a go-getter, and gives motivational speeches at his old high school about gratitude and perseverance. And he wanted a poem for his presentation, and this is that poem. I have been to places that few have ever seen, not north or south or east or west, but someplace in between. Not life or death, but somewhere else, without a ground or sky. And when I think of where I've been, I often wonder, why? Why did it have to happen? Why was I hit so hard? Why didn't the driver watch his way? Why wasn't I on guard? So wounded none could help me, or maybe scared to try. Without my praying parents, they'd have left me there to die. The doctors did the things they could. I know they did their best. but it was up to someone else and me to do the rest. A woman with a picture. She put Jesus on my chest. "Welcome back, Will Hitchcock," I heard him say, and then, "I'm sorry, Will," he said. "You'll have to learn it all again. To walk, to talk, to eat, to move." And I was just a kid. To learn to move each muscle. But that's just what I did. They said I wouldn't make it. But now I'm some go-getter. Because of places I have been, I know there's someplace better. That's Will's poem by Tarzana Joe.
That is an Easter poem. That is a great poem. That's a great story. Have you met Will in person?
No, we've had an email. Like all my clients, I know them only through the magic of email.
Well, that is a wonderful poem. Will that be at tarzanajoe.com, Joe?
Will be. Thank you.
And I appreciate that so much. I don't know if Will wants his additional website or anything put out there, but let me know if he does.
I'll put that out at tarzanajoe.com. Sure.
All right. And then also, if you need a poem, you go to tarzanajoe@reagan.com. And if you need a poem, that's the first poem we've got for a recovering patient like Will. And there are others ahead in the next 20 years. So, Tarzana Joe, a happy Easter to you, my friend.
Happy Easter. Two little pieces of housekeeping. Can I?
Yes, please.
For some reason, when I email people, it's going to their junk mail. So if you sent me I want a poem form and you haven't heard from me, you have. Look in your junk mail because I answer them all. And the second thing is, last week's poem was about Obamacare.
Yeah.
The most response I've had to any poem in years.
You're kidding.
So you tell your Republican platform people that people are still motivated.
They still want their doctor. They still want to keep their doctor, and they didn't get to.
Absolutely.
All right, I will do that. Tarzana Joe, happy Easter, my friend. Oh, he joins us. Good morning, Congressman. How are you?
Good morning. Sorry I'm a couple minutes late. Looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, not a problem. I appreciate so much. We got 45 minutes of wonderful conversation ahead. I'm talking about your brand new book, Dignity in a Digital Age, which I'm holding up, my well-thumbed and annotated copy of Dignity in a Digital Age. Do you know the Frank Luntz rule, Congressman, that you've got to say the title of a book 7 times in every interview or people will not remember the title? So Dignity in a Digital Age. And Frank is right about that. I mean, have you learned that rule yet?
I learned that rule in my first campaign. They said that if you don't say something 7 times, it won't get through. Unfortunately, I think the Democratic Party needs to learn that rule more. So
it's repetition.
Get a message across.
Well, I greatly appreciate a progressive Democrat like you who represents the Silicon Valley coming on a conservative show. You were preceded
I respect you.
I
followed your career. I respect very much. I think in this country we have to learn how to have conversation with people we disagree with as Americans without questioning people's motives or shrinking away from debate.
Or assuming that we know what each other thinks. I think that's the greatest problem, is that we assume we know what every person we talk to think. I've had a lot of practice because my college roommates are guys named Guerin and Poneman who served guys named Clinton and Obama. So I've been arguing with Democrats for 45 years. You are a University of Chicago and Yale lawyer. I'm a Harvard guy and a Michigan lawyer. So this should be kind of fun. I want to begin, though, with my 2 standard questions for every first-time guest, Congressman. Since it was published in 2007, I've asked every guest if they've read The Looming Tower by Lawrence Wright. Have you?
I have not.
Okay.
Should this be part of my reading list?
Strongly recommend. Lawrence Wright is a man of the left, a New Yorker reporter, but it's the best thing written on the ongoing war on terror. Second question, history question. Was Alger Hiss, in your opinion, a communist spy?
Wow, I assume so. I mean, from what my reading of history is, I'd have to go back, but the last I read about that was in college, and
You're right.
I think that's how it was taught.
You got it right. The reason I ask is a GPS on whether people actually took any AP history, and not many people know, but you got it right. Now, the new question. Since you've written Dignity in a Digital Age, the book that has most influenced my thinking about big tech is from a Marxist HBS professor who's now emeritus, Shoshana Zuboff, called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. Have you had it? It's enormous. It's huge. It's like
I have read that, and I've corresponded with Professor Zuboff, and she and I had a number of conversations before I wrote this book.
Okay,
I have a lot of respect for her.
We share a framework of both. We know the potential and the peril of big tech. What surprised me the most in the Zuboff book, it's not indignity in a digital age. 5% of the apps that we download have in their terms and conditions, which most of us automatically click on, permission to activate the audio and video on our devices. Isn't that stunning? Can't we outlaw that?
We absolutely should outlaw that. I mean, here's the basic point, Hugh. You should have a right, an inalienable right to your own information, to your own data. If you go shop at a store, at a CVS, and if you knew that when you went to shop at a CVS, they were going to x-ray you and take all this information from you, you'd be appalled. So why is it any different when you go online? Why should these companies have the right to get all this data about you without you knowing about it? Or even worse, as you're saying, record conversations or get information that belongs to you.
100% agree. This is where we begin with the agreement. Information is property. It belongs to you. We give it away when we sign those terms and conditions. But Congressman Khanna has many proposals about that, where we're going to go to. I want to start with Tim Cook, though. Tim Cook of Apple gave a speech this week to the International Privacy Association in which he rejected antitrust legislation for big tech. I find that very disturbing. He's getting ahead of the trend. What did you make of Mr. Cook's speech this week?
I respectfully disagree. I mean, my view is that we definitely need stronger antitrust legislation. Now, I'm not for breaking all these companies up reflexively, but there are a couple of things that are common sense. One, they should have some limitation on their ability to just acquire competitors. The whole idea of a free enterprise, free market economy means that you have to have competition, and some of these companies have just acquired their competitors. So there need to be restrictions on mergers that are anti-competitive. Second, they shouldn't be able to put restrictions on their own platform in ways that discriminate against sellers. And that's what a number of these companies are doing. And so I think that there needs to be an antitrust remedy to that.
I agree. By the way, I agree completely with that. There's a third part of the stool legs, though, that I want, which is the national security law. Mr. Cook, I saw him engage with Senator Cotton at an event once. He didn't even know who Senator Cotton was, defending the refusal to unlock the San Bernardino terrorist cell phone. I had Bill Barr on the show. The last author I had on was Bill Barr last week. And in his book, he talks about the December 26, 2019 Pensacola Naval Air Station terrorist attack. There were two iPhones there. The terrorist disabled one, shot the other. The FBI repaired them, but Apple wouldn't let them unlock it. Don't we have the right to demand national security cooperation in the aftermath of a terror incident from people like Apple?
Here we disagree. Obviously, I think we have the right to demand national security cooperation, and there are places where I have said tech needs to do more. For example, they need to cooperate more with our Defense Department. They need to make sure that technology is being used by our Defense Department. My problem with going around encryption, and there was a disagreement in the previous administration on it, is who gets the key? I mean, if you really want to have a master key that Apple has that could be unlocked or that the government has, what if that key gets into the wrong hands? You literally could have someone unlock every iPhone. And the military, some of the national security folks at the military actually do not want encryption to be broken or to that be in the hands of the private sector. And my understanding is there was a disagreement with Attorney General Barr and the Pentagon on that issue.
Well, my position is we shouldn't allow Apple to sell us any products if they're not going to help us find terrorists. You know, Congressman, if a terrorist attack is unspooling, there are names and contacts on that phone that we have to know before they flee the country, before they kill other people. I don't even know how we have a debate about this. I don't want to give them a key to everybody's phone. I just want the Attorney General to be able to have the bat phone or the bat signal to go out to Tim Cook and say, we need to get into this iPhone now and get a response. Is that really the same thing that you're talking about?
Well, how would Apple do that unless they had a master key? Now, I think there are solutions to this. Israel, for example, is extraordinary in the intelligence that they have, and they're able to unlock phones because their intelligence agency actually has figured out how to unlock things. And I rather that we invest in that kind of technology in the United States, and eventually people are able to unlock these things, rather than saying, okay, Apple, we need you to keep a key that can get into everyone's phone. What happens if someone breaks into that key? I guess that to me is the danger of requiring that Apple be able to break into any phone if there's a violation of law or terrorism.
It's scarier to me that we would encourage the government to develop what the private sector has, as opposed to going to the private sector with a warrant demanding having judicial supervision from Pfizer or somebody that they cooperate. But let's set aside disagreement and move on. Every book has a compound fracture in it. And since I read books closely, I always look for the compound fracture, and then I step on it, Congressman. Yours is on page 197. I quote, it's about Hunter Biden. When you talk, although I am convinced there was no truth to the salacious allegation, Hunter Biden's emails themselves referencing his father were of public interest. Of course they were, but you don't believe any of the salacious allegations about Hunter Biden still?
Well, first let me say how I took a pretty unpopular position. I did that before the election in saying that those things shouldn't have been censored, that the idea even that the New York Post links were being taken down was wrong, that in a robust First Amendment tradition like ours, people in the public sphere, that their information should be public. And I didn't think that the personal life of Hunter Biden was relevant, but I thought that the information that in any way was about President Biden was relevant. Now, I still take the president at his word that there is absolutely nothing that he had or involvement in it, and I believe the president. That doesn't mean I think it should be censored.
No, but what you wrote in the book is, although I am convinced there was no truth to the salacious allegations, Hunter Biden's emails themselves referencing his father were of public interest. The salacious allegations have to do with his drug use, the embezzlement, the corruption in Ukraine, the deal with China. Are you still persuaded that there's no truth there?
I take the president at his word, and it's not what I'm not trying to avoid the question, but the Silicon Valley elected me to Congress to figure out how do we stay ahead of China, how do we bring good jobs. What the president's son may or may not have done, I leave that to the law enforcement process, and it's not for me to. I haven't sat there and looked at all the facts of the case. My view is I take the president at his word, but I will say this: that I think the law enforcement process, whether it's for the president's son, my family, anyone, should be independent and go where the facts lead. And that is my view on it.
Okay, I get that. And I appreciate the fact, actually, you're better than most Democrats on this who want to disappear the story. But when you say there is no truth to the salacious allegations, what, are they arresting you, Congressman? Are you talking on a cell phone on a phone?
No. There's an emergency around there, and that's not arresting me. The FBI isn't hearing me on this call saying to be cautious about the president's son. So no.
Okay. Well, I just think the salacious allegations are all true, and they're obviously true now about Hunter. I don't know about the president. I'm not talking about the president. It's just you wrote a book 6 months ago. And it's always the unfortunate problem of putting a book to bed and then having it show up 6 months later and the story's advanced. But I'll leave it there. Let me move on.
Let me ask you this, Hugh. Don't you think there is a challenge in our country with the focus, and you could argue this on both ways, of the criminalization of politics and the back and forth? My view is this. We've got a massive challenge, and that is America as a free enterprise democracy going to lead the 21st century, or China? Are we going to do something about half the country that has been left out because our jobs are shipped offshore to China and down south of the border? And are we going to create new economic prosperity and job opportunities or not? And I guess I wish that we would, both Republicans and Democrats, I'm not saying one side is holier, that we would start focusing on those issues, or we're going to be in a serious disadvantage with China.
Well, I talk policy all the time, Congressman. That's why I invited you on to talk about big tech. But I do believe that when a story surfaces in the middle of an election cycle and it's disappeared by big media, and 48 intelligence professionals say it's Russian disinformation. You remember that ad, right? Do you trust any of those 48 people now? I mean, it's just a lie. They signed their name to a lie. It wasn't Russian disinformation. It was a computer, it was Hunter's, and it had terribly damning information on it. And 48 people persuaded American media to disappear it and technology to censor it. Isn't that a problem?
Well, you're not going to hear me defend the censoring of that information. I mean, look, I think that information about people's families, if they are private, should not be part of the public sphere. But that information, if there was any question that it related in any way to President Biden, that I just said, look, I disagree with all that censorship, and I disagreed with the censorship before the election. I think these things ought to be in the public domain. I think when you censor it, actually, you make a bigger story of it. I'm not for censoring that kind of information. We can disagree on whether it's true, whether it's not true, but we can certainly agree that it belongs in the public domain.
All right, last question on that, Congressman. 48 members of the intelligence community signed a letter denouncing it as Russian disinformation. Do you trust those 48 people as much as you used to?
Well, look, people make calls that they believe at the moment. No one has made a call that is that's 1,000%. And so, what I would say is that it depends on what they are opining on and their information. But what I also say is that that's why we have these things in the public domain. They can have their opinion. They're entitled to put their point of view out. Ultimately, I think in the free marketplace of ideas, the truth prevails in our democracy.
All right, now you're a progressive from Silicon Valley, and I've been up there. I've had dinner with Mark Zuckerberg at his house. I'm one of the token conservatives that show up there and talk to people up there occasionally. And I think dignity in a digital age may be the best case for the progressive agenda that I've read. I'm not persuaded. But I'm curious if you agree with me. I think that the overwhelming oppression of the left in Silicon Valley means conformity in thinking, that it drives out center-right points of view. Do you agree with me that the mind think up there is a deep blue bubble? Did I lose you again? Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, Khanna.
Yeah, I believe in this country we have a problem that we're all in our bubbles and that we're unwilling in certain cases to subject our ideas to scrutiny. I think that's a problem at times on the left. I think it's a problem also on the right. So, I think this cancel culture, it goes, in my view, both ways. There was at my alma mater, Yale Law School, I was embarrassed that there were students yelling down the speaker because they had a conservative point of view. On the other hand, the idea that, you don't read, let's say, Toni Morrison's Beloved, who's one of the great American writers, objectively, taking from Faulkner, I think that's also silly. So, I think what we need in this country is to examine ideas on their merits, not be afraid of engaging, and do things like we're doing on this show.
I agree. It's just that the blue bubble in tech land is so deep. Let me play for you some Frances Haugen on CNN Plus Wednesday, the data scientist turned Facebook whistleblower, talking about the problem of Facebook and Snapchat. Get your comment on it. Let's play that audio for Congressman Khanna.
Do you think Instagram should be age gated?
I strongly believe Instagram should be age gated. And I think we should have a conversation around things like, why isn't it, there's a setting built into Instagram where like a parent can say, you can only use this for 2 hours a day. Instagram could literally roll that out tomorrow. The most important thing to remember about all the issues around kids and Instagram is that Facebook knows how to fix it today, and they choose not to because they buy their profits with our kids' safety.
Do you agree with that, Congressman Khanna?
Agree with the thrust of it. I mean, I don't know specifically, I would say 2 hours a day, but I agree that Facebook knows that this product has caused teenage depression, suicide, anxiety, eating disorders. And I guess I don't understand why you wouldn't have basic regulation on a consumer product to kids like you have for anything else. I mean, if there was a business person selling a product that was causing kids to have anxiety and commit suicide or have thoughts of suicide, we'd obviously regulate it. And I feel the same exact way about what we ought to do with Instagram.
Yeah, it scares the hell out of me, Congressman. I got soon to have 5 grandchildren. They're all under 10. I have no idea how I would raise a child. Now, I did pretty well, or at least my wife did with our 3 kids. But we didn't have to deal with this. And I really don't know. You must be a young parent. You're a young guy. You're not a Steelers fan, are you, by the way? You're from Bucks County. You would be an Eagles fan.
I was an Eagles fan and growing up, and now, of course, I'm a 49ers fan. I'll tell you very quickly, when I was in Pittsburgh, I tried to find common ground saying, I grew up in Philadelphia and was an Eagles fan. They said I'd be better off telling people I'm a 49ers fan. So.
Yeah, you would. You would. That's good. Well, I just don't let Steelers fans on the show because I'm from the Cleveland area. Anyway, I want to go back to CNN
well, you
Plus.
love my wife is a huge Browns fan, and I don't get the family because they're like 1 in 14, and they'll be rooting for them to win. And I said, isn't it actually better? You get a better draft pick. But no, they cheer till the last game for them to win. And of course, every year they think they're going to the Super Bowl, and they're always a little bit overly optimistic.
Congressman, you married up. I'm here to tell you, you married up if you've got a Browns fan. What'd she make of the Deshaun Watson deal?
Well, they're optimistic, and I said about the quarterback, I said, these guys, that's a lot of controversy, but they're hopeful, and they like Baker. They first thought Baker Mayfield was going to take them to the Super Bowl, but look, my wife's sister said their dog is named Baker, so this is a family that is like.
I'm with him. I love your. You know what? You can come on anytime. I'm not even going to give you a hard time. I'm a Baker guy. My son's middle name is Ohio. We love the Cavs, the Guardians, and the Browns. Let's go back to Mark Zuckerberg. They want to invent Zuck's Bucks. When I sat down for dinner, Ross Douthat was there along with me at the New York Times. I'm not going to tell you what Mark said, but we both pummeled him on the idea. At that time, they're going to go into crypto. Now they're talking about Zuck's Bucks. Why not outlaw this? I do not want big tech creating reserve currencies that will displace the dollar. They don't need to do this. What do you think about just simply saying, no, you may not take your massive market dominance in these other areas and create crypto domination and displace the dollar while you do it?
We may have a slight disagreement here. Look, the United States dollar is 51% of world currency. The cryptocurrency is less than 1%. And the idea of displacing the dollar, I think, is never going to happen in our lifetimes. In fact, the new cryptocurrencies, the stable coins, are all actually marked to the dollar. And the Fed Chair Powell has said that we may even have a digital cryptocurrency just to keep in advance with technology. And the basic value of cryptocurrency and blockchain, the ledger, is just it's going to reduce transmission costs. It's actually going to move power away from banks. But I'm not fearful that in some way it's going to displace the dollar. What I would caution is that we don't want some currency to become a monopoly by it, but its very nature of cryptocurrency is it's decentralized.
Well, I understand crypto to the extent that any talk show host does, not very well. Frequently wrong, never in doubt about everything, except I won't talk about crypto. All I know, and what Ross Douthat underscored, is that we think Mark and his team are sufficiently skilled, powerful, and mercenary that they will take over and dominate that space, and that over 20 years, if they grow their crypto the way that they have grown their platforms, they will displace the dollar. And why would we even invite them to try, Congressman?
Well, I have more faith in the dollar and in American institutions. I'll tell you what I think is actually the biggest flaw of the Valley, and I'm very proud of the Valley, and I'm very proud of the innovation, is that we have to sometimes realize it's just one page or a half a chapter of the bigger American story. I mean, the Valley is possible because we're the greatest nation in the world with the rule of law and free enterprise and a very strong dollar. And so the idea that I think Zuckerberg, in his own view, may think that he is akin to a head of state, he's nothing like that. And I just am not concerned that a company with a 600 billion or 700 billion market cap in an economy of ours, which is 20 trillion, is going to come close to displacing the dollar. If they ever came close to doing something on that trend, I'd be the first to say the dollar needs to be paramount. But right now it's less than 1%, and I even think Zuckerberg will have a tough time competing with Ethereum and Bitcoin and the current cryptocurrency.
Oh, it's interesting, Congressman. I do not underestimate Mark or any of his colleagues on anything. I think I've got a fighter pilot in the family. He reminds me of nothing so much as a fighter pilot. And I've gotten a chance to spend some time with him on a couple of occasions. And I just think he's radically smart and his team is radically smart. And I would just bar them from that. Let me move on to the craziest thing in your book. And I like a lot in Dignity in a Digital Age. We'll get to where we agree. This is the craziest thing. You write that you want a new set of platforms, video forms, audio conversations, or textual exchanges sponsored by the government. And you suggest that think of an online PBS. Now, I worked for PBS for 10 years, Congressman, and the KCET newsroom erupted in a standing ovation when Al Gore had Florida called for him. PBS is the most left-wing media organization in America, even to the left of MSNBC. NPR is to the left of PBS. Do you really think PBS is a model for online engagement sponsored by the government? That would be a disaster.
Well, let me say this. First of all, the biggest thing that I was focused on in creating online community was in local communities. And that doesn't have to skew ideologically in any way. I mean, you could have a local community that leans more Republican, leans more Democrat. And the hope was that we could have civil conversation, things that people care about, their local high school football team or baseball team, local people in the community, and that you could actually foster that conversation. On the national sphere, what I said is, look, we need to have multiple forums. There shouldn't be censorship, but having some public sphere nationally where people could exchange ideas and that you could have reasonable debate is a better thing than what we currently have, where you have none of that. And I would say that if there happens, the difference with PBS is that they actually offer programming, so they have a viewpoint. I would want to make sure that any government site did not have a particular viewpoint, that it was viewpoint neutral and didn't violate the First Amendment by promoting a particular point of view.
Well, I am relieved. I didn't know if Yale Law School taught con law anymore. That was always a doubtful thing, in my opinion. I've been teaching con law for 25. It'd be impossible to have viewpoint and content neutrality on the forums that you propose, just like PBS. I mean, do you disagree with me? PBS is left of left. If you watch the NewsHour, it's just gone over the left edge. And I think the people who are attracted overwhelmingly to public broadcasting are lefties. And that's okay. That's fine. It's legitimate. It's a point of view. It's your point of view. But I just don't want to trust online forums to the government because they always go to the left. Rebut me if I'm wrong.
Well, help design an online forum that's more neutral. I guess here's my point. I got the idea actually from something that people are doing in Taiwan, and that is, here's part of the problem in this country is I think so many people feel disempowered as citizens. They feel their voice doesn't matter, so they sit there on Twitter, they sit there on Facebook, they share things, they like things, they put out videos, but they're not engaged in constructive influencing of the government. They don't feel like their voice matters. We used to have a town hall in these town halls in this country where people felt engaged. And I guess my proposal was just in an ideal form. You've got conservatives, you've got independents, they're discussing ideas, and people feel like that can influence the government.
Well, I like that. And the two platforms that you talked about in Taiwan, and I was unaware of them until I read about them in Dignity in a Digital Age, and I'm going to invest some time in figuring out how they operate. I just don't know Taiwan well enough to make the transfer to the United States culture where all of media goes left. Let me digress for a second. You know, CNN Plus has failed miserably. They have 10,000 subscribers. Why do you think that is, Congressman Khanna? Why has CNN Plus failed?
I think it's new. I mean, starting out something new is challenging. I think this online is still not how we consume news. People still watch television. They listen to talk radio, so it's a new medium. But I think it's too early. It remains to be seen whether they'll succeed. Maybe they should hire you, Hugh. I mean,
I think the reason they failed is because there's nothing for me to watch. There's absolutely no reason from anyone from the center right to go on there in the way that, for example, CNN used to have Crossfire. If Khanna and Hugh Hewitt sat down every day, we'd mix it up. But there's none of that. And in fact, I think it's the last real news show, the only one I do on TV anymore. I've left NBC. I don't do Meet the Press anymore. is Bret Baier's special report because it's the last honest news program in America. I honestly don't think we have a news media anymore. We have a political society. And please disagree with me and point me to where that's not true.
Chuck Todd on Meet the Press. He asks tough questions of Democrats.
I never say anything bad about a former colleague. Chuck is a friend of mine. He's very, very smart. I think Meet the Press has lost the thread. I really do. And I think their panels are inevitably 3-1 or 4-1 if you count Chuck in. And I just don't see, that's why America's turning off. You see the ratings. Fox beats MSNBC and CNN every night in every time collectively. And that's,
I'm one of the very few Democrats. I'm probably one of the only progressives.
You show up on Fox.
Goes on Fox, and I sometimes, and I don't go on Fox to say, okay. Some people go on Fox saying, okay, how do I embarrass the host and try to get a viral moment and just have my talking points? I go on Fox to actually. I know it's kind of old-fashioned to have a conversation, and I've said there are times I go on Fox and I think, okay, I got the better of the argument. There are times I go on Fox and I think, no, I didn't get the better of the argument. But that I don't understand the hesitation. And by the way, one time I was interviewed by the British press. It was a left-leaning interview, person from the left on the British press, and they were far harsher than Fox News. So I just think we ought to have debate in this country. Don't be fearful of engaging in ideas, and and over the long run, even if someone isn't exactly fair on an interview, I just have a lot of confidence in the American people to get it right in the long run.
You know what Churchill said is trust the people. The reason I read Dignity in a Digital Age is because you go on Fox News. And I thought, okay, I'm going to invest the time. When I read a book, I put a lot of time into a book, and I do my notes and I prep an interview. I got 10 pages of notes. And I do it because I see you on there, and I just wish more people, Chris Murphy comes on the show, Angus King does, Democrats who will go in harm's way do more for the Democratic Party than 1,000 Twitter people talking to each other in the blue bubble. And I say the same thing to conservatives who are in the red bubbles around the country. Let's go back to the book. Democracy is a universal value, page 279. That's what you write. But it isn't, and it won't be. I mean, I look at Putin, Xi, and Khamenei. They're the new axis of evil. They're the axis 2.0. Shouldn't we deal with the world as it is, Congressman Khanna, not as you would like to? Because democracy is not a universal value. We are lucky and blessed to have it, but it's an aberration. And unless and until we recognize the evil people in the world, and I just named the big three, we aren't going to be safe.
Well, I don't have a utopian view of sort of Immanuel Kant's perpetual peace, that we're all going to be liberal democratic states at peace. I guess my point there is to say we should say that a democratic society with liberal rights is a morally correct society. That's not a cultural construct of just Western society. These are fundamental human rights. Those human rights apply to people across the world, and that you should be able to say clearly that liberal democracy is morally superior to Putin's form of government or Xi Jinping's form of government. That's my point, not that suddenly everyone in the world is going to become a liberal democracy.
Okay, because we can agree on that. We should aim for the spread of democracy. Richard Nixon, who I worked for in 1978, used to say progress is defined by the incremental advance of liberty and literacy around the world aligned with or within the West. And incremental advances come slowly, and we are going backwards in Russia, China, and Russia. What do you make of the deal that is emerging out of Vienna, Congressman? It's a nightmare to have Russia mediate and midwife $1 billion to a terrorist state. What do you think of this new JCPOA?
Well, I'm concerned. I mean, I've supported the JCPOA. I will support the efforts of the administration to have the JCPOA, but I don't think there should be some Russian exemption on being able to have enriched uranium or dealing with Iran. I mean, I don't think that we ought to be ceding anything to Russia at this moment in history. And I've spoken about that clearly in the media and to the administration, even though I'm for very much the deal. And we disagree, I'm sure, on whether we should have a deal or not. I just don't see how right now we can do anything in giving Russia any advantage.
Oh, we do disagree on having a deal, but let's go back to the book, page 283. You bring up Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's never been on the show. She will never be on the show. We don't agree on anything. She insulted the American military this week. I've got 2 children serving active duty. And I'm just deeply distressed by that. But why bring her up, Congressman? Because she is not represented.
I don't even remember. I'm sure I did. What did I say about her? Remind me. I read the book. I will give you this, Hugh. Of all the people I've talked to, other than President Clinton, who had read the book cover, every page, you're the first person who's really read the book, and I respect that.
Oh, it's on page 283. We've seen this with the rise over the past half decade of right-wing nationalism now sweeping across the world. In the United States Congress, Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar.
I remember that.
Okay, now, look, they're there. They represent the far right edge of the Republican Party. I rarely spend much time on anyone on your far left edge except AOC because she's just out there and you can't ignore AOC. I don't spend time beating up on Ilhan Omar or things like that. I just don't think it's helpful. We have 2 bell curves, a bell curve in the Democratic Party and a bell curve in the Republican Party. I think you're kind of on the left slope of the bell curve of the Democratic Party, but you're not out on the tail. And I think we ought to stay focused on those people because that's where America is. Agree or disagree, Congressman?
I agree. I wasn't trying to personalize that. I now remember what I was referring to. They created this caucus in Congress about how we need to have the Anglo-Saxon heritage define America. And I just, I believe America's founding was 1776, and I think we're the greatest nation in the world precisely because we have a nation that's defined to ideas of liberty and equality and the Constitution. And we don't define the country based on a person's faith or a person's ethnicity as the fact that we elected someone named Barack Hussein Obama is testament to that. So I just thought they have a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes America exceptional. And that was what I was arguing.
Well, I agree with you, but I also think your far left has. And so I would just rather ignore the people who fundamentally misunderstand the Declaration and the Constitution, the apple of gold and the frame of silver, and focus on those of us who have some common ground. Okay, back to the book. I got to argue now with you about education, racial, and gender equity. Let's start. What do you mean by equity, Congressman? I'll let you explain it rather than quote the book.
I mean, an equality of opportunity to have a dignified life. And my view of the country is one of the big problems is there's $11 trillion that has piled up in my district because of innovation, entrepreneurship, globalization. At the same time, we ship jobs offshore to China, millions of them. We ship jobs south of the border because of NAFTA. And a lot of communities in this country, rural communities in the Midwest, black and brown communities have been left out, and their kids are being told to leave their hometowns. They don't have economic opportunity. And so we've got to bring new economic opportunity to people in places left out.
All right, so we can agree broadly on that. Equity is broadly agreed on that. This week in California, in San Diego, Patrick Henry High School, which is the largest high school in the San Diego district, banned, slashed, I think totally eliminated, there might be 1 or 2 left, all advanced English, American history, biology courses in the name of equity via an email from the principal saying that the high school was too stratified. That is insane. And that
I totally condemn that. I mean, look, I believe, I think we ought to get to what the real fear in this country is. When Terry McAuliffe made that gaffe saying parents shouldn't have a say in their kids' education, as a father, I'll tell you, I want to say in my kids' education. Here's what he should have said. He said, they don't teach critical race theory in the schools. But that's not what people were afraid of. You know what people are concerned about? Let's just talk honestly. They're concerned, are we going to teach kids in this country about being embarrassed to be white? Are we going to teach kids to be embarrassed about being American? And I think what we ought to say is, of course, people should be proud of being white Americans. George Washington was white. Abraham Lincoln was white. The men who died on Normandy to save the world from Nazism were white. Of course, we should be proud of being American and read American history. We're the greatest experiment in democracy. But then I think we should have the second part, which says, you know what great nations do? We teach honestly about our history. And we're going to teach that there were 250 years of slavery and 100 years of Jim Crow. And you know what? China doesn't teach honestly. Putin doesn't teach honesty. What makes us exceptional is that we can be honest about our history. And I think a common sense message like that will cut through a lot of the right-left cultural debate.
Well, bravo. I agree with that. But now let's go to where we disagree. On page 78, I want to quote, currently there is not a single federal agency that targets grants towards black and brown entrepreneurs. Now, you are a Yale Law School graduate. You know that such a program would be unconstitutional because you cannot award benefits or inflict penalties on the basis of race or ethnicity, right?
Well, it gets to the place of whether you think some form of affirmative action, as I think President Kennedy coined the phrase, is valuable or not. And I guess my view is that we should have an intentionality of giving people opportunity who have been deprived opportunity. But that intentionality, as I write in the book, should not just be for black and brown Americans. It should be for large parts of the rural communities and other parts of America that have been left out. I say, look, we ought to have some requirement that 10% of these tech workforce are from rural America to get preference on federal contracts. But I do think that we ought to have an intentionality of trying to get opportunity to communities in African American communities, Latino communities that have been left out. And I'm sure we disagree because I'm sure affirmative action.
Well, it's unconstitutional. As John Roberts, the Chief Justice, said, the way to end discriminating on the basis of race is to end discriminating on the basis of race. And it's in the Constitution. That's what the 14th Amendment is about. It's so deeply, you can go get the rural grants. I'm all for that. You can do the top 10% of every high school get into college. There are lots of ways to avoid using race. It's just race cannot be used anywhere, anytime, neither ethnicity, and very rarely gender, because our constitutional law is rather fixed. It's a fixed star. And I thought they taught con law at Yale. Who taught you con law at Yale? Did you have a meal?
I had Bruce Ackerman. You know,
okay. Yeah, I don't, but he's a good con law teacher. So you forgot, or you're skipping over the inconvenient part. Let me go back. I got to ask you a family question. Your parents are from the Punjab, one of the most difficult areas in the world. Who do you think the Punjab ought to have been assigned to at the time of the partition of India?
Wow. You know, my grandfather spent 4 years in jail with Gandhi. And so the Indian independence movement is a big part of my family. I mean, look, in retrospect, I think what would have been better for the world is if there hadn't been a partition and if there had been a South Asian nation. And by the way, that would be better for the United States because our alliance with India, in my view, is critical to prevent China from expanding. And what China is doing is aligning in part with Pakistan, and that creates greater complications for us. But you know, it's in the United States' interest for India and Pakistan to de-escalate, to not have the tensions, and for us to focus on the real challenge to the United States, which is China.
Well, I agree with all that. But should Punjab be unequivocally within the country that is now known as India, that is not going away, and Pakistan's not going away? Should we make it a part of American foreign policy to declare firmly and finally, the Punjab is in India's land and it's not changing?
No, because that would not be in the American interest to wade into that. I mean, Pakistan would go crazy if someone were to say that. And, you know, it's in our interest to have a strong alliance with India, but we also don't want to antagonize Pakistan where we push them into China's corner. And ultimately, you know, I was born in Philadelphia in 1976, our bicentenary, and I'm very proud of my Indian heritage, but I will always call balls and strikes for America first. That's why I've criticized India for not condemning Putin, for abstaining in the UN. I mean, what are they doing? Especially when a year ago we came to India's defense in the border skirmish with China.
But this is where sometimes the progressive left leaves me quizzical. We have to defend boundaries that are defined by international law. It's why Ukraine has to be defended by us, even though they're not in NATO. It's why we have to come to the defense of Taiwan, and it's why we have to settle the Punjab border, because you can't by force alter these things. And unless and until the American nation, left, right, center, and everybody declares boundaries are boundaries and international law applies, we will encourage the attempts to unsettle Punjab and for the Pakistani militants to take it.
Well, look, if the Pakistan invades in Kashmir, which is the more
Yes.
problematic area, and then I think obviously the United States should come to India's defense. And I think India. I don't know how you feel, Hugh, but I think India is going to be one of the most important allies for the United States in the 21st century, vis-a-vis China. So it's certainly in our interest to build that alliance. I just don't think we want to wade in to a border dispute that both sides can resolve.
All right, we disagree. Let me move on to more close to home. And Santa Clara County, where you represent. Are you familiar with the Families First, the first five in Santa Clara, the Children and Families Commission of Prop 10? I served on the one in Orange County for 17 years, and I know how that thing works. And I am deeply in belief that universal preschool is a nightmare, but that we ought to use all that Prop 10 money to layer on services for children who are disadvantaged, English as a second language, recent arrivals who come from broken families, all that stuff. But you want universal preschool. And I keep telling our members never voted for it in Orange County because it was a waste of money. How do you want to spend money on the middle class and the upper middle class when in Santa Clara, all that Prop 10 money could layer on to the most disadvantaged kids?
There's research actually by a fairly conservative economist, James Heckman, Nobel laureate at University of Chicago, and what he shows is that if you have strong preschool, and that's a big caveat, that it's got to be right, it's got to be with great teachers, it's got to have the right ratios. It's the single biggest investment that the country could make in a person's future, and that's my view. That look, Head Start in a lot of places actually has succeeded. And if we could do it well and provide it for people who want it, many people will still choose private preschools. But to give folks who don't have that opportunity the opportunity to succeed, I think that's a worthwhile investment in this country.
Well, I think you just agreed with me. I'm not against that. I just want to do it for income challenged kids who might need preschool. You help them. But universal preschool, Rob Reiner's dream. I helped Rob Reiner pass Prop 10 back in the days when he talked to me, when he and Huffington put it on the ballot. I helped because I thought it was good, but you don't need to give middle-class families help to go to preschool. You need to give lower income families. And this brings me to your tweet of last night. We must do two things before the midterms, Ro Khanna wrote. Cancel student debt and pass a bold climate package. Okay, let's forget the bold climate package because that ain't happening, and we don't want inflation at 40%. Let's talk about canceling student debt. Hey, that's a moral hazard, Congress. You know what that means. You can't cancel everybody's student debt. That just tells them borrow money.
Let me make the case, and then you push back.
Please.
First of all, I'm not for canceling student debt for people like me. I took out over $100,000, but I did very well, and so I think it ought to be means tested. People who are under 150,000 or working class families. But Hugh, here's a challenge I ask you. Name me one other country in the world, one other Western democracy where you finish school, you finish vocational school, you finish college, you finish law school, and you're $30,000 or $40,000 in debt. It's crazy. Why are we the only country where we're having young people be penalized for getting all this education in a time, in a digital age, where China is out there producing engineers, scientists? We want people to get as much education as possible, and we don't want them to have to go into debt to be able to do that.
Well, the answer to that is we're the only country in the world where the opportunity exists to pay that off quickly. Like you, I paid for my law school with debt, and I paid it off quickly because I went to work for big law after I got out of the government. And like you, I made my money and paid off my debts, and I move up in the world. And because we are an opportunity society, I am encouraged to save and earn as opposed to spend and not save, because I know I have debts to pay. And if you let people out of their debts, ollie and free, they will not do that, and they won't produce the character or the work habits that are necessary to keep the economy. They'll end up with welfare states where people simply do not pay back debt. It is a fundamental difference between us on that, Congressman. We're not going to close it, so let me move on to another controversial thing that you wrote. This is from I did a lot of research outside of Dignity in a Digital Age as well. Katie King in the San Jose Spotlight, June 26, 2020, Congressman Khanna. Explaining that police officers are a necessary part of society, Khanna said defunding the police didn't mean disbanding law enforcement altogether, but the representative said it was time to examine whether funding is being appropriately distributed among police and other social services like education and affordable housing. Okay, that's 2 years ago, right after George Floyd. 2 years later, we have rising crime, terrible, terrible crime in the inner city. Don't we need more funding for the police as opposed to redistributing their funding?
Yes, we do. I mean, I had a meeting with the police chiefs in my district in San Jose and Sunnyvale and Fremont about a year ago. We've got, I'm sure you've read some of these terrible smash and break-in crimes, smash and grab crimes, and they said we need more police, and I agree with that. And I think we need to uphold the rule of law. I'm not for ruining a young person's life if they break into Walgreens, but I'm also not for you can do that and not have accountability and do that 3-4 times and not face prosecution. So absolutely, we need to fund police in this country. They should be properly trained, and we have to recognize that there still are issues of abuse and issues where people aren't being treated fairly. But yes, we need more police.
Smart tacking. If you're going to be Senator Khanna, I hope you keep coming on after Dianne Feinstein retired. But I'm glad that you tacked on that. Otherwise, it was going to be a brutal campaign. Page 182. One solution, you're talking about the threat to local journalism. One solution is to impose a small tax on the astronomical advertising revenue from Google and Facebook and put it into an independent fund to support local newspapers. This is a better alternative to banning targeted advertising altogether. A National Endowment for Journalism. Now, I was the general counsel of the National Endowment for Humanities when you were a youngster, back in the Reagan days. There is no way this is a good idea, Congressman. Those things inevitably go left. They inevitably are rent-seeking nirvanas and oasis in the sea of spending. Where did that come from? And do you stand by a National Endowment for Journalism?
Well, maybe it could be state by state or local. Let me tell you here what the problem I was trying to solve. I think local papers in communities are so important. I think some of these rural papers, community papers, are deeply important. You know, as I do, many of them are going bankrupt. Many of them are going out of business. And it's a bad media environment if all we have is the New York Times, Washington Post, Washington Times, Washington Examiner, Fox News. We want these local papers to thrive. And many of them don't have a liberal point of view, these local papers. And I guess I'm just trying to figure out how do we get them some opportunity, revenue to thrive. And if it's state by state, I think that would avoid some of the ideological concerns.
You know, Congressman, if there's a demand, the market will produce the product. There is a demand in my old town in Orange County, and there are lots of local papers that are giveaways from the Register and the Times. There are papers in Northern Virginia where I live now. There are papers where I go in the summer. There are local papers everywhere. I just think a National Endowment for the Journalism, you'll kill journalism. Last couple of things. You want to amend the Alien Torts Claim Act to allow national access to our courts to seek the removal of content inciting violence. You know, our courts are a wreck anyway. Did you ever practice? Did you ever actually go into a court? I didn't.
I did.
Okay, you're ahead of me.
I did practice. I mean, I didn't do a full trial, but I practiced for 5, 6 days. I took depositions, did motions. I argued, motions, certainly.
Which firm were you with?
I was at O'Melveny and Myers.
Oh, my God, you're an O'Melveny guy. No wonder you're smart. Okay. Do you ever run into John Denniston up in the Valley, by the way, my law school roommate?
I know the name, but I did not meet him.
All right. So John and I have talked. You're just reading your book is like talking to John. All you Silicon Valley people are the same. If you amend the Alien Torts Claim Statute to allow foreigners to bring their claims against the courts will never get any work done. I mean, that's like inviting 1 million more lawsuits. Did you think that went through?
So I thought I caveated it, and I should, is that it's only for gross human rights abuses. So it's not like you can bring an Alien Tort Act claim if you just have some legal dispute. So we're talking about if thousands of people are being killed, like what happened in Myanmar. And what I was thinking there is Facebook had a role there. I mean, basically, a lot of the genocide in Myanmar was done on WhatsApp and Facebook, and they have no accountability. And the only accountability to that is in the United States courts. And so it would be very rare. It would be for massive human rights violations. We still are the best legal system. And I wanted to have some accountability in those kind of cases.
When I clerked on the D.C. Circuit in '83, Congressman, we had a federal Alien Torts Claim Act. It's one of the worst statutes in America. You cannot save that statute and make it work. But I just call it your. Maybe you cut that page out in the paperback edition. Let's close on a place where we agree. You declaim against the quote self-perpetuating foreign policy priesthood in America. Amen. But why don't you define what that is and what you mean by what should replace it?
Well, I have the view of what George Washington had or John Quincy Adams had, which is our primary purpose first should be to defend our national security. Obviously, we should hope for the spread of liberal democracy, but we can't go out around the world trying to use our military to make countries liberal democracies. It doesn't usually work. Look at Afghanistan. I was for President Bush striking Al Qaeda. They inflicted harm on us. We should have made sure we killed the terrorists. Fine, but we stayed there 20 years, and we got a new Taliban government. We basically replaced one Taliban government with another Taliban government. What was the purpose of that 20 years? Is in extending the military in the way we did? And by the way, $6 trillion of debt because of the Afghanistan 20 years.
Well, pause for a second, Congressman. What about all the women who had a chance? Ambassador Raza is an acquaintance of mine, abandoned by her government, abandoned by the United States. For 20 years, women had a chance to go to school. Now, they don't have that chance anymore. So for 20 years, we advanced literacy and literacy in a place that is forlorn and could not support it. But we saved a lot of people along the way, didn't we?
We did, but you look at the rural parts of Afghanistan, and that was not the case. Women and children were being killed. I mean, in those parts of the place, not by us, obviously, but by the warfare and by the Taliban still, and by some of the Afghan government that we were supporting. I mean, they were brutal in some of the rural villages. And I guess the point is this: I have a lot of respect for our military. I think our military goes out of their way to do the everything possible to minimize loss of civilian life. They're trained that way. And I think the men and women who serve there really were helping women and children. I just don't think that is a strategic use of the American military. And it often ends in very ambiguous situations because we don't know who the bad guys often are in these places.
So I got two last questions, Congressman. The defense budget submitted by the president is a real cut because inflation is at 8.5% over the last year. He's proposing like a 3 to 5% increase. Will you support an inflation-adjusted real increase in defense spending in the next budget?
Probably not. And the reason is that it's not about how much we spend, it's what we spend it on. You know what I want to see our military do? I want it to cut some of the fraud and the waste. And I want to make sure we're winning. Here's where I would spend increased money. Let's make sure our submarines can compete with China. Let's make sure we can compete on space. Let's make sure we can compete in AI. Let's make sure we have a technological lead. We need to have a 21st century strategy and look at what China is doing and make sure we're staying ahead. So it's not that I'm opposed to spending on key areas. I just think there has to be a whole look at the Pentagon budget, the procurement process, make sure that we're reforming some of the defense contractor money, and investing in what's going to actually make us safe for the 21st century.
My only comment to that, Congressman, is we're out of time. We are really out of time with China, and we need to go get those submarines, the Virginia class, the Columbia class. We need the space weapons. We need the cyber and the special forces. And the money's not there. And by the time we figure out the procurement problem, we will have lost the South China Sea. Very last question. When you run for the Senate to replace the retiring Dianne Feinstein and you win, will you come on once a month?
I will absolutely come on. I can't commit to once a month, but I will come on. I don't know if I'm going to go for Feinstein. You know, the irony of it is, I think I represent an important place in Silicon Valley.
You do.
But here's the central thing that I think I'm doing a bill with Senator Rubio, and we're doing a bill that says let's have public-private partnerships to start rebuilding and reindustrializing America. I'll end with this. I was in Galesburg, Illinois, just this past week. They had invited me to come down, partly because of my book. It's a town of about 30,000 people. They had 5,000 jobs in a Maytag factory, and that went down to Mexico. And they talked about, how their parents and their grandparents worked in that plant. They used to celebrate Christmas. They used to celebrate Thanksgiving. One guy, Tony, turned to me and said, "Look, I never wanted to be a millionaire like some of your folks in Silicon Valley. I just wanted a decent job. I just wanted a sense of community. We've lost all that." And, he said President Obama spoke about us in the 2004 keynote speech. But, you've had Obama, you've had Trump, you've had Biden. Our lives haven't gotten any better. It's time we recognize we shipped way too many jobs to China. It's time we recognize that we need to produce things and make things in this country again, that we need to be focused on creating good-paying jobs across the country. That's not a Democratic message. That's not a Republican message. That's what this country needs to do to succeed. And, that's what I'm interested in working.
Nicely put, Congressman. But the secret is that is a Republican message. You should just switch parties, and then we could come on every week as opposed to every month. Congressman, Dignity of Digital Age, a great read. Come back soon. Congratulations on the book. I appreciate the hour of your time this morning very, very much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Be well, Congressman.